Good afternoon and welcome. Thank you very much. It's so good to see so many people here. I'm really delighted that so many people have been able to join us and that so many of the prospective candidates have been able to join us too. My name is Vicky McDermott and I'm the Chief Executive of Papworth Trust. And Papworth Trust, as many of you will know, is a PAM disability organisation, and we support people with disabilities of all descriptions to ensure that they can live their lives in the same way as everybody else, and that's what's really important to us. So I'm really looking forward to some great debate today from our guests here about disability and a real understanding about what it means for them. I'm going to set down some ground rules and then I'm going to do a bit of an introduction to everybody and then we'll get started. Just in terms of introduction, one of the things that is really critical is we've particularly reached out today to disabled people and the families of disabled people, carers and other disability organisations in order that we've got a really good number of people here. And the reason we've done that is because actually Papworth Trust really wants disabled people to have much more of a voice. One of the stats that horrifies me is that only in the last election, only 1 in 6 disabled people voted. The other thing that horrifies me is that nearly 50% of polling stations in the last election weren't accessible. And I know that we're going to do a lot better this time. So what really matters today is I'm really keen that people have a voice, people have the opportunity to ask our candidates here what they would do and all the things that we want to know about disability. I just want to highlight a few other things. So firstly, as you will have noticed, photographs are being taken. If you're uncomfortable with your photo being taken or being used at any stage, if you can just let colleagues around the room, some of our staff members know, and they can make sure that we can do something with that. What we are looking to do is we're looking to tweet some of what's happening today. So really keen that if people want to be involved in that, please join in the conversation. Our handle is @Papworth Trust. We're really keen to have as wide a debate as much as possible. There are 2 other candidates standing in the election, Patrick O'Flynn for UKIP and Keith Garrett for Moving Politicians. Unfortunately, neither of them were able to join us today, but they were invited. So, in terms of ground rules, firstly, everyone will have their own views and opinions. And what we need to do today is treat people with respect and dignity and make sure there's room for everybody to have their own views and opinions. Please, can we just have one person speaking at a time? That goes both to the audience and to the candidates. If you'd like to speak, can you raise your hand or in some other way signal to me that you'd like to talk? And staff members will be running around with roving mics and a challenge Annika Canaway to make sure that you can be heard. So, with that, I'd really like to start with introducing the candidates. I'll say a couple of words about them and then let me spend a couple of minutes talking about disability. So here, on my right is Julian Hufford for Liberal Democrats. Julian has been MP for Cambridge since 2010. Before then, he was a councillor and worked as a scientist. Julian is interested in helping people with mental health conditions and changing the test for disabled people's benefits. He wants to increase the number of apprenticeships and protect local NHS services. Julian grew up in Cambridge and studied at the University of Cambridge. Welcome, Julian.
Thank you very much.
To my left, I have Daniel Zenkner. Daniel stood for election in Cambridge in 2010 and in Norfolk in 2005. Daniel wants to make sure that companies aren't in charge of NHS services. He also wants to make sure that people get more wages in Cambridge and he wants to protect the environment. Daniel also studied at the University of Cambridge and Daniel works for a trade union called Unison and he used to be a councillor. To my far, to the end of the table we have Rupert Reid for the Green Party. Rupert was a councillor in Norwich for 7 years. Rupert wants to make sure that people get more wages and make sure the government doesn't reduce how much it spends on services like benefits and the NHS. He also wants to protect the environment, reduce inequality and support workers' rights. And Rupert teaches philosophy at the University of East Anglia. And at this end of the table, we have Shamali Fernando for the Conservative Party. Shamali grew up in the East Midlands and Cambridge before she moved to London to study law. Shamali is a barrister with 12 years' experience in England and is also a licensed attorney for the State Bar of New York in America. Shamali wants to improve quality of life, create employment opportunities and build a greener, fairer, sustainable society. So can I start with you? Give me a round of applause to welcome our candidates. What I'm now going to do is I'm going to go to each of them in turn. I would ask you to keep your intro to a couple of minutes, please, to make sure we've got as much opportunity to hear the voices of our audience as possible. And I'm just going to go through the order that they happen to be on my sheet. So Julian, would you like to go first?
Well, thank you very much, and it's very good to see so many people here. This is bigger than when we had it 5 years ago, which is excellent. It's good to see so many familiar faces from the Papworth Trust, from Voiceability, from the LifeWorks campaign we successfully ran, and many other places. And I've spent the last 5 years fighting for Cambridge, getting more money for our schools, more money for our NHS, particularly for mental health, as you mentioned, trying to sort out housing and transport. But I've also done a lot on a range of disability-related issues, because this is something which affects me as I grew up. I have long-term experience of this. My mother is registered blind, and so when I was little, I used to read her bedtime stories, because it was very, very hard for her to be able to do anything for me like that. And so I got used to the idea of both visible and invisible disabilities. If you met my mother, you might not notice that she can't see you if she looks at you. But also the issue about physical and mental disabilities, that both of those are there, some of those are ignored too often. And so I've done various things. I've looked at, tackled the work capability assessments that many of you, I fear, be far too aware of. These were initiated by the last government. Had I been an MP at the time, I hope I'd have seen the problems and voted against it, but I wasn't an MP then. And I've worked, for example, with Rethink Mental Illness to make sure that they are done better for people with mental health issues, because currently they are awful at assessing it. They're reasonably good at working out if you can walk somewhere. They're not so good at working out if you're actually going to walk somewhere. We've seen some changes. I see Max in the audience. I went to a work capability assessment, or rather didn't, because it turned out even the new company didn't have wheelchair accessible rooms available, which is pretty shocking. I also led the fight against some of the proposed changes to the disabled students allowance, because I think people should be able to study freely, regardless of their disability. We worked to introduce an access to elected office fund, so that people with disabilities can become councillors, can become members of parliament. I've worked with Scope, looking at the cost of disability, with guide dogs, where I've been blindfolded. I've been around central Cambridge in a wheelchair. There is much, much, much more that we can do, that we must do. I have a long list here, but I'm out of time. And I hope we'll talk about most of it later on. But this is a really important issue. So thank you for coming, and make sure that all of us think about this and talk about it.
Thank you, Julian. Thank you very much, Julian. Daniel, would you like to introduce yourself?
Thank you very much, Vicky. I'm Daniel Zeischer, I'm a Labour candidate. I live just around the corner in Victoria Road. And I came to Cambridge as an undergraduate to study history of the Kings. My first job was at Shire Hall, and it's fantastic to be here again. 5 years ago, we sat in this room and had a really, really good discussion. And I was very struck then by just how well informed the audience was. And we had quite a spirited debate, I think, about going to some extent about how society treats disabled people. I work for a trade union, Unison, that has a very strong disabled members group, and part of my job is to promote their work with parliamentarians. And one of the important things to understand is how you see the world. And the social model of disability has completely changed, I think, people's understanding. It's not about disability, it's actually about the way society operates and the things you can do to overcome the obstacles for people. And actually, if we change the way society sees disability, it's amazing what can be done. And I think it's been inspiring to see just what disabled people have been able to achieve over the last few years. The Paralympics, a fantastic example. And yet since then, a lot of it seems to have gone away, and it seems to be just about those people who are top athletes. And I have to say, I think the way disabled people have been treated by this government over the last 5 years has sometimes been bordering on the cruel, frankly. I think the changes to the benefit system, particularly the bedroom tax, which has particularly hit people with disabilities. And I can make this absolute cast iron promise to you today, that if I'm elected, and if Labour's elected in a couple of weeks, scrapping the bedroom tax will be one of the very, very first things we do. Now, by chance, today is the day when Labour has launched its manifesto on disability issues. So we've got a whole range of things that I think will probably come up in the discussion as we go through today. But to me, this is one of the most important issues. I'm delighted that you're here, right on the doorstep. It's very good to see so many of you who I've worked with over the last few months. And I have to say just to Anne from LifeWorks, I think the campaign that the LifeWorks campaign ran was an inspiration to everybody and showed that when you're really determined and you build support, it's amazing what you can achieve. So I think it's a message of optimism. When people are optimistic and hopeful and people come in and work alongside, it's amazing what can be done. We should never lose our optimism. And I suspect I'm going to go away feeling more cheered from this Hustings than many of the ones I go to. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you, Daniel. Rupert.
Well, thank you for inviting me. I'm Rupert Reed. I'm the Green Party MP candidate here in Cambridge. And can I start by saying it's fantastic to be here in what seems to be a genuinely inclusive Hustings. We've got somebody signing here, we've got the stuff appearing on the screen here. I'm afraid this doesn't happen at most Hustings, and it's really, really encouraging and moving and gratifying in a sense that it's happening here today. We heard from the chair about the problems that disabled people have in voting. There are, of course, some practical things that we could probably do to ease those problems, such as we in the Greens think we should be making it much easier for people to vote online. But you know what, and this is the main point I want to make in my opening remarks here. It's no good making it easier in practical terms for people to vote if they don't have anything that they really want to vote for. And I agree with a lot of the remarks that Daniel has just made. But I think it's also true that if you actually look, and I would encourage you to do so, if you actually look at the Labour Party manifesto, it is really pretty discouraging in relation to some of the issues which are going to, I think, be central this afternoon. Scrapping the bedroom tax is good, I totally agree with that. But it's important to be clear, Labour's manifesto is an austerity manifesto, just like the Conservatives and the Lib Dems. They're going to carry on with cuts to local government. They're going to carry on with cuts to social security. They're going to carry on with cuts that are going to affect some of you, if they get into government by themselves. What I'm hoping is going to be the outcome of this election is that a Labour minority of government will be dependent upon the votes in Parliament of anti-austerity forces, SNP MPs, Plaid MPs, Green MPs. So I'd encourage you to think this afternoon about voting for any of those three parties. I'll leave you to make up your own mind about which of those three you'll vote for.
Thank you, Rupert. Shimon.
Thank you, Vicky. And good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for inviting us all here. 16 years ago, I was studying on Hawthorne Way at a school called Cambridge Seminars, which has now moved to Newmarket Road. So it's amazing to be back in the surroundings, and my headmaster the year after I left acquired some office space just further down the road here. So it's lovely to be in this environment. Chamali Fernando, I'm 36 years old and I've been a barrister for 12 years, representing people from all walks of life, sometimes the most vulnerable in society, those facing loss of their job, loss of their home, collapse of their business, or even facing jail. I'm also an attorney to the State Bar of New York, and of course in New York there's lots of disability discrimination legislation coming through which is influencing some of the work that we do in Britain as well. I'm a policy advisor to set up an international court for the environment. So the environment is something that's really high on my own personal political agenda. Since being selected as the candidate, I have gone around the constituency with my team and we've been knocking on doors, listening and learning to the issues that matter to people on the doorstep for our city and for our country. I've also engaged with work with Cambridge Area Partnership, which sets up apprenticeships between business and schools. But particularly my focus has been to guide them towards opportunities for children with special needs and the opportunities for them to be able to access apprenticeships. In the Conservative Party, we actually believe in transforming practice, policy and attitudes so that hundreds of thousands of people can access hundreds of thousands of people with disabilities can access employment. We want to move towards a system of full employment in the next Parliament. It's possible, and it means that everyone who wants a job will be able to get a job. Last year alone, 140,000 disabled people were able to access work. We want to go further, and that we can only do with your support. I've been talking to a few of the staff at the Papworth Trust just this afternoon as well, and some of the ideas that have come forward from this organisation are so important and are actually very easily achievable. We just have to put our heads together and actually have a strong advocate for Cambridge City to be able to punch well above its weight. My goal is to make Cambridge the global benchmark for a greener, fairer and more sustainable society.
Thank you. Well, some really, really fascinating opening remarks from each of the candidates. So I'm going to stop it being about us talking and open up to the floor for the first question. Thank you. I think we've got a question over there, Nina. Could you, if you could introduce yourself, that would be really helpful.
Hello, I'm Rotten Smart. I'm a city councillor in Cambridge, Labour councillor. I also work for Disability Cambridgeshire. So I've got a couple of questions, two, and also a comment. So Julian Hupper said about more funding for mental health, which is, the cutting edge of fashion, because mental health is very fashionable to talk about now. But the coalition government over the last 5 years has cut funding by, it's 8%, is it? Just check. 8% in 2010. So it's all about to talk the talk, but you haven't done it. You cut funding over the last 5 years. So my question is about means testing. And so working for Disability Council, I'm an administrator, but sometimes I take part in the benefits appeals, because we're so short of funding, staff, money, etc. And the last one that comes to mind that I took part in, the woman, I won't go through the whole thing, but basically it was a very emotional hearing. It was, it was her husband, me. There's a sort of legal person, a doctor, and a clerk. And, we say our stuff, we get asked questions, and basically the thing that really cracked it and the woman started crying was about her not wanting to work. Because she really wanted to work. That was really what she wanted to do. She had worked in the past, but she couldn't work now. So my question is about, when benefits appeals are running at 40% success, i.e. people are going to these appeals and winning 40% of the time, 4 in 10 times. That seems to me like a system that's broken. And I want to know what you think about a society that makes people go and effectively beg for their benefits back from a system that's cut it. And my other question, just on a more general level, is about what do you feel about discrimination against disabled people that's gone on for so long? Do you feel there's a future in discrimination, or do you feel there's a vision that you've got that will cut discrimination, make it stop, to make a better society for us to live in?
Thank you very much for those two questions. So similarly, there's a question about the benefit system and then a further question about discrimination against disabled people. I'm going to hand over to the panel. I will ask you to keep to a couple of minutes each, and I will be quite strict if you can't start going over that. So if we can start, we'll start the opposite way around we did last time. Siobhan, would you like to go first?
Thank you. So, in a nutshell, about people having to beg for their disability allowances and these appeal hearings that you mentioned. The biggest problem we have with government is that between central government, so that's currently a coalition, and local government, the implementation of policy, the decision-making process, fine, let's get it dealt with at the lowest possible level, at a localised level. But that's where policy objectives go wrong, and you've heard from Daniel mention the spare room subsidy. In fact, it was never the intention of Parliament to force disabled people from equipped homes into unequipped homes, because that costs more money to actually put them into a new home that requires ramps or whatever facilities they had in the previous home. So there's a lot that happens, and I want people to be aware that it's in the process of implementing policy. Sometimes policy can be delayed, it can be blocked, and it can be changed in its format. So that's a key point to bear in mind. In terms of a vision for those with disability, I touched on it in a few of my opening remarks, but actually the Conservatives, our philosophy is at the very core. It believes in equality of opportunity. You have to take the whole country with you, otherwise there is no point, and their growth is...
You're not actually answering this question.
Sorry, okay. If we just let the candidates each have their 2 minutes.
She's not answering the question.
Okay, if we just let them have their 2 minutes, and then we'll come back. Okay, you can have a right reply. I'll come to you next, I promise. Okay. Shimali, would you like to finish?
In terms of a vision, it's actually about equality of opportunity for everyone. So I've spoken in my literature and also today about improving quality of life for everyone, creating job opportunities for everyone, and building a fairer, greener, more sustainable society. It isn't fair that people feel that they have to pay. And I've had to deal with situations where people have had to go to benefits appeal hearings, and I've had to be the lawyer at those hearings. But again, that boils down to who is taking the decision to either prosecute or investigate those people, and that is done at a local level. In terms of my vision for against discrimination, yes, of course, there's discrimination in society in many respects, and we have to move towards a society that doesn't discriminate. That's, I've answered the question. If there's something I haven't answered, you can more than welcome.
We'll pick it up after everybody's had an opportunity to speak, if we may. Rupert.
Yeah, equality of opportunity sounds great, doesn't it? Equality of opportunity is like, for example, all of us in a room here just stand together on a starting line and then there's a race. Guess what? Some of us arrive quite a long time before the others. We need to be talking a lot more in this country about equality of outcome. In other words, we need to be talking a lot more about reducing actual economic inequality. And if we do, then we'll actually finally be able to start addressing the root causes of mental health. So one of the points that the questioner very well made is we have a mental health crisis in this country, which is being worsened, I think the stats bear you out, by cuts from the government over the last 5 years. But even if those cuts were repaired, as they should be, we'd still have a mental health crisis in this country, because we have a crisis of inequality in this country, and that is causing an epidemic of depression and stress and so on. We need to achieve a more equal society. And I want to say to you this afternoon that there's one party in this room that's best placed to do that. The other part of the question which I'm going to seek to address is on means testing. What we in the Green Party want to see is a lot less means testing. We would radically simplify the benefits system. We would sweep away most means testing by integrating the tax and benefits system and producing what's called a citizen's income, a basic income that everybody has, that they can all live off. On top of that, there would need to be some benefits still remaining, for example, clearly for some disabled people. But there should be a much less complicated benefit system. It should work in a much more egalitarian way for everybody. And if you do that, you can have a lot less means testing, and a lot less of the humiliations and so on, which the questioner, I think, very powerfully and movingly and correctly referred to. So that's the Green Party solution. Sweep away a lot of this means testing by having a citizen's income. We will seek to implement that over the course of a parliament.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Rupert. Daniel.
Thank you. I start by first of all taking issue with Shamali's defence of the bedroom tax. I don't blame you personally, but I do blame people like Ian Duncan Smith, quite frankly. People were warned repeatedly through parliamentary debates, and there were endless opportunities as Labour sought to stop it and then to repeal it. And I'm afraid at every point, coalition MPs lined up to defend it. And I'm afraid, Julian, you didn't actually oppose it either. You opposed parts of it, but we needed you there with us at those times. But let me come specifically to the question you raised, Martin, which is a very good one. 40% of appeals, clearly that system isn't working. And I think part of the problem is the people who are carrying out the system are actually incentivised effectively to punish people, to keep people from getting support. And one of the big things that I'm really pleased to see in Labour's disability manifesto today is actually to say, actually, we're going to penalise those companies that consistently get it wrong. In other words, completely change the balance. And I think that's really important. But there's a bigger issue around the benefit system. I live just around the corner from Henry Giles' house, which isn't one of the most popular places in Cambridge, I know. And my partner used to work for the employment service many years ago. And it's quite clear to me there that what's going on, again, they are pressing staff to impose sanctions on people. They claim they don't have any targets, but it's clear that's what's going on. And it's become a system that's there to punish and penalise rather than support. And that's completely wrong. And we need to change that. And then on the bigger issue of how we tackle attitudes to disability, well, that's what the law's there for. And again, in Labour's Disability Manifesto today, a clear pledge to strengthen the law on disability hate crime. Changing attitudes is hard. Just implementing laws isn't enough, but actually you need to give a lead. And I think we have seen it already working on a whole range of equalities legislation. I'm proud of what the Labour Party has done in the past on this. And I believe we will get to a place in future where everyone is seen equally, treated equally. And actually I rather agree with Rupert. It's not a level playing field. I've always felt the same about that. But there is so much more that comes from giving people a little bit of help, a little bit of support. Everybody gains from that. We can do better.
Thank you. Julie.
Well, thank you, Martin, for admitting it was a party political question. I think that helps. And on mental health, it has been under-supported for many, many, many decades. I remember my predecessor complaining about cuts to mental health in the last 5 years. It is something which has been going on for far too long. And part of that is that because have often been targets set up for physical health, every time money has come in, when the Labour government set up physical health waiting times, there were no waiting times for mental health. And so money would come in, it would be spent on physical health every single time. That's what happened for the first few years of this government. We've changed that. So we've actually, in the last year, NHS England said there's a 1.4% increase in funding for mental health. We said that the extra 24 million coming into Cambridgeshire this week, I think, or last week, 4.5 million of that has to go into mental health. We're not having it shifted away anymore. We've got £1.25 billion in the last budget for child and adolescent mental health, and also for pregnant women and new mums. We've got money for eating disorders, one of the biggest killers of young people. I talk about some of this with from Pinpoint. So we are making a change. I'm really proud of that. In terms of appeals, I think you're absolutely right there, that the system is broken. Work capability assessments simply do not work, which is why I've been trying to get them fixed. And I agree with you, it is an atrocious system, the way that it works. It was an atrocious system set up in 2007, with Atos hired by that last government, and I hope you would agree with me that that was an error. It was not good enough, and I hope Maximus will be better. I'm not certain of that at all. But the error in 2007 was a very, very serious one. The issue about sanctions is a really serious one as well. We have to change that system. We've got in our manifesto a complete ban on targets for sanctions, on league tables for sanctions, and a yellow card system, so people are not sanctioned for things that they should not be held responsible for. And I don't think Labour are going to be any better. In fact, Rachel Reeves, who wants to take over from Ian Duncan-Smith, proudly said that Labour would be tougher than the Tories on benefits. That's not something which I would want to see. Do have a look at that. On discrimination, just quickly, there is far too much of that. It is a complete disgrace. We also have a large section in our manifesto about disability hate crime, disability hate speech. All of us hopefully can unite on saying it is completely unacceptable. We all have to do much more to tackle it.
Thank you. Thank you to all of our candidates. Would you like to comment next, Madam? Could you introduce yourself?
Oh, sorry. My name's Anne Robinson. Hello?
Yes, it is, yes.
Yeah.
We can hear you.
Loud enough anyway.
Not necessarily for everyone.
Yeah, it might be helpful if Ben got
Hello?
into it. Yes, we can hear you, yes.
Hi, my name's Anne Robinson and I'm one of the campaigners for Life Works, which is a mental health outreach for people with personality disorders. We did a 4-month sit-in last year, which we won to keep our mental health community centre open for 5 years with the CPMT. So, my question to the lady...
Yeah. All of the candidates will need to be able to answer the question.
Sorry, it's new. I'm new to this.
Bustling.
The benefits thing. It's killing people. People are dying because of what the Conservatives have brought in. I find it very distressful, and a lot of other people find it very distressful, that there are people committing suicide because of the targets and the stress and the strain that you cause mental health people and people with disabilities for the work capacity assessments. And personally, I want to know what the party is going to do about it. Is my question.
That's really helpful, thank you, Anne. So the question was, what are each of you going to do with respect to the work capability assessments and changes thereafter? Okay, so to try and keep in the interest of fairness, Rupert, would you like to go first this time?
Yeah, so as I suggested in my opening remarks, there is only one party at this election in England which is actually saying we want to end austerity. We've had enough cuts to social security, we've had enough cuts to local government, we've had enough cuts to the kinds of things that you're talking about. Now, the question may be asked at some point, well, how are we going to pay for this? How are we going to say stop further cuts while all the other parties want to carry on with cuts? And the answer is as follows. Though we are prepared to tax things that other parties are not prepared to tax, unlike any of these parties, we would bring in a wealth tax. Those with a lot of assets, the wealth tax would only cut in if you have more than £3 million of assets, should actually pay a little more of their fair share to society. And we would increase the top rate of income tax. On the radio this morning, some of you might have heard Julian and Daniel arguing about whether the top rate of income tax should be 45% or 50%. In the Green Party, we're saying it should be increased to 60%. When was it last set at 60%? It was under that extremist socialist Prime Minister, Margaret Thatcher. And that, I think, just shows you how the political agenda has shifted in this country, that it's now considered a radical and left-wing thing to do, to set income tax's top rate at the same rate that Margaret Thatcher set it at. Well, that's what we in the Green Party are brave enough to say needs to be done, even though Labour unfortunately are not. And because we're prepared to cut things that other parties are not prepared to cut, that's also why we can find the money. We're going to cut, as a party, we would cut the Trident nuclear weapons system. We would cut the HS2 vanity project. We would slash subsidies for fossil fuels and nuclear energy. So that's where we would get the money from. So the answer to your question, I've answered it at a general level, but I think that's the level ultimately needs to be answered at. We say, end austerity. Stop trying to cut all these things, shave it down, means test more and more and more, and I've just set out for you how we would pay for it.
Thank you, Rupert. Daniel.
Well, I think we can have the economic debate separately, but I think your attitude is really about the attitudes of politicians to people. I think there is a fundamental difference in attitude, and I do go back particularly to Ian Duncan Smith. A few years ago, I had the pleasure or misfortune to actually do a direct debate with him at Cambridge Union. So he was sitting where you are, and I was standing here. And I was absolutely astonished, because he's a man on a mission. And his absolute view is that people must be forced back into work, and that somehow it's a kind of moral failing if people aren't in work.
But some people aren't well enough.
Precisely. That is exactly my point. He has no understanding of most people's circumstances or what life is like for most people.
Some of these people in this room are not well enough to work.
Precisely. Precisely. But I don't think he and some of the people around him get that at all. And they just don't understand it. I don't know whether they understand it or not, in fact, but they are driven by some kind of ideological zeal. And it's about punishing people, driving people. And this goes back a long, long way in British society. Now, my view is completely different. I think we support people and help people. That's why Labour introduced the Access to Work scheme, because we knew that there was so much that people can do if you just change a few things. And employers often need a bit of help and persuasion, and that can make such a difference. So it's two completely different approaches to the world. And I absolutely believe that our approach, a much more gentle, compassionate approach, is the right way to go. But we need to get these people out, because if they have 5 more years of this, it will be terrible for so many people. That's why I'm absolutely determined that we do it.
But then again, you're also looking at it from the point of view of getting people out there and getting employers to look at it from a different point of view. You're not looking at it from the person's point of view of they are unable to work.
No.
That's a point really well made, Anne, but I'm not going to allow Daniel to respond to it just because we need to, in the interest of
So
fairness.
it's a point really well made, but you're not going to let it reply.
Because we need to, in the interest of fairness, make sure everybody else is able to have their say as well. Please, Anne. Julian. Just going backwards up the order.
Okay. Well, thanks, Anne. It was an honour to work with you on the LifeWorks campaign, and thanks for all your help since then. And I mean, there's a number of things that, the system does not work, and it's been a huge fight with people like IDS. There's no doubt about that. We won some fights. I was very involved with stopping him from a plan to stop anybody under 25 from being able to get housing benefits. ridiculous idea. I took the Chief Executive of the YMCA here to go and see him. We stopped that, and other things we haven't managed. And I fought him on lots of things like the sanction system, where I managed to get him to say in public that there should be no targets. And then I worked with the Job Centre to write to everybody in the region saying, Ian Duncan-Smith says there should be no targets, make sure there aren't. Now, whether that actually permeated and changed everyone's behaviour, I don't know. But there is far more to go. I mean, the system as set up in 2007 simply does not work. And part of it, there are so many problems. Part of it is about the law around it. Part of it is about Atos, the company, who've been pretty crap, which is why we sacked them. Part of it is because there are lots of different assessments. So and I know the stress, I've worked with so many people in this room, going through that process, fighting appeals, trying to win those appeals. So what we'd like to do is to put some of those assessments together, so you don't have to go through one and then start on the next one. Make sure that they're fair, make sure they're accurate, because they're often not, making sure they happen quickly, so that it's not such a stressful experience. I think we also want to say, probably we're going to have to look at bringing it back into a public provider. Unless Maximus can massively turn around what they're doing, and I'm sceptical, it simply will not be good enough.
Thank you, Julian.
Thank you, Anne, for a very impassioned question, raising some of the key emotional issues that people go through when they are at the hands of localised or other operators looking to clamp down on benefits that they actually need. One of my ambitions and one of my policy pledges is to support those in need, and we have seen through the Welfare to Work scheme that actually even the Papworth Trust have had some great results. I was talking to a few of you earlier, and you mentioned the opportunities that have come about by being able to give people the skills that they need to access jobs and to support them into a working life. Because ultimately, when we talk about full employment, it's not that everyone has to work. It's everyone who wants a job has the opportunity to be able to access a job. And what the Papworth Trust does is give that support to people. We've created, through Welfare to Work, the opportunity for people to start gaining skills in the voluntary sector. If they've been out of work for a long period of time, they have that chance. And we will support them into work, because what we have found is work can give people a sense of purpose in life, a get up and go in the mornings. There are some mornings that people don't want to work, and many of us look at a Monday morning and think, oh goodness, do I have to go to work today? But generally, people find that they can start earning a living, they can start having a sense of purpose, they can start making a contribution to their own lives and interact with people. So one of the things that I will look to do, particularly in Cambridge, the opportunity is ripe and it's ours to seize. We've got big business in Cambridge. Big business can actually make the adjustments in the business environment in order to be able to allow people to come into the workplace and have jobs where accommodations are made for them. So I would want to be a negotiator with big business to give people those opportunities, and that is something that I'm looking at with CAP, Cambridge Area Partnership, for the Special Needs Apprenticeship Programme. But let's look at that in terms of a raft of disabilities.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, we'll look for... What I will ask candidates to do is to, please, I'll ask you to focus on the questions that are being asked. Can I have another question from the floor, please?
Yeah, can I?
Yes, just here, sorry.
It's all right.
My name's Tina. I live in Cambridge. I'm visually impaired. A couple of years ago, I had done one of my benefits checks more than about 4 or 5 times. And being visually impaired, I can't see to fill in the form. And they kept telling me, oh, it's Andy from the Cambridge Deaf Association.
Hey, right, you all right? Yeah, good.
I
seem to squeeze past you, I've got to go and beat the traffic. Thanks a lot.
It's not fair on those who've got disabilities and other people who have the same problem. It's just not fair. And also, the other thing is I'd like to prove is Adam Brooks. When I've had eye check-ups, the hospitals not been contacting me via telephone in my format. Now I'd like to contact me. It's taking me later. And the eye test is no better.
Thank you very much, Tina. 2 really interesting questions there. So the first was around the number of benefit checks going on, and the second was around NHS and may I be really rude and broaden it out to public services more generally, approaching disability in the right way, taking into account
Can I just
accessibility.
add to that point that the DWP does not provide letters in Braille or in large print. They simply
Thank you.
do not provide it.
Thank you very much. That's a really, really helpful position. Okay, so we're, again, in the interest of fairness, we'll change the order round. Daniel, or first?
Tina, very good questions. And I think these repeat checks are a particular problem, and I just don't think it's necessary to do so. And the people doing it need to be much more sensitive.
It's work-wise next door when you can their building, so it's actually a large
Well, it's just effectively for hearing.
I'm sorry.
Will that finish?
It will be finished now, yeah.
Very sorry about that.
I'm so sorry.
Are you okay?
Yeah.
Good. Yes, I think those repeat checks, and it goes back to the point I was making just now, that these companies are incentivised to stop people getting benefits. What we should be doing is incentivising them to get it right, rather than to be harassing people. On Adam Brooks, it's a specific point. I see no reason why Adam Brooks shouldn't be doing better on that, and I think it's something worth taking up with them. And I just think all providers need to think harder about how they deal with people. It goes beyond disability. There's been too long a culture in public services, I'm afraid, that everyone has to fit around the public service. Actually, the public service should be fitting around people. And Labour's big promise for the future is to have a new approach to the health services, which is centred around the individual. We call it whole person care, and we think it could transform the way the health services work, linked much more closely with local authorities and social care. That's a big issue, probably too long for a 2-minute answer, but please look at it, because I believe it could be the transforming idea for this century, as the NHS was for the last century.
Thank you, Daniel. Julian, next.
And it's a really good issue, Tina, and as I've seen this with my mother in Adam Brooks itself, where her vision may well be different from yours, but trying to navigate for her is extremely difficult, and the signs are pretty confusing anyway. I've also seen similar issues with a number of constituents that I've worked with, where there are particular forms of communication which work better, particular ones which simply don't work. The entire public sector should be listening to how best to communicate with somebody. Do you want things in Braille? Do you want things by electronically? You know, it will depend for different people. It should be easy to find out what you want, not what was most convenient for the public sector. It's one reason why our manifesto as a party is available in a simpler form. It's available in the format that allows you to print out Braille. It's the format that's also available in large print. You can also have the entire thing read to you if you would like to listen to it as you go to sleep. That's an open opportunity for everybody. One thing I'm quite interested in is something called inclusive design. And actually what we now know is that if you design things that are good for people with disability, they're often very good for everyone else as well. So, for example, kettles with a sort of base were originally designed for people who had arthritis and couldn't put the cord in. Everybody now uses a kettle with a base because it's easier for everybody else as well. And similarly, if we can get the design right, it will help everybody. Another example of that, just very quickly, that I've been pushing on, is to get audio as standard on all buses. Now that helps people, I see some people who are quite keen on that. That helps people who can't see what's happening. I've tried taking the buses in Cambridge blindfolded, it's quite terrifying. But actually, it helps the rest of us as well if we're not paying attention. So it's one of the things that helps a lot of people and be a really, really good thing to see. We should also, by the way, give wheelchairs priority on buses over children's buggies that could be closed up. Exactly.
Thank you, Tina, for your question. All too often, if you have an appointment at the hospital, they send you 2 letters, usually the same letter, but they might arrive a week later. If you're lucky, you get 2 letters. Sometimes you might not get a letter at all. Unfortunately, this system of writing letters has been brought in under the need to provide objective evidence, and actually it fails patients and it fails clients. So, for example, within the area that I'm most familiar with within law, at the end of a case, you have to write to your client, and quite often your client might not be able to read, might be moving to another town, and there are issues as to why that client is never going to get that communication. But you have to do it to show the subjective evidence. That's silly, it costs more money. Why can't you just ring a client? Now obviously the good law firms, they will ring their client or they'll tell their client immediately after hearing, this is what happened, are you happy? This is what your next steps are. And we all try to make those differences, but sometimes at a local level, when it's a large organisation managing a large number of people, you find that these failings exist. What I will do is try and bring those failings to the attention of the hospital and say, you know, in your case, someone should have done something by now to make the hospital aware that this is a problem for you. So that's very important. In terms of the DWP and the opportunity for them to provide information in Braille, it's not just in Braille, it might be in a different language, the language that the person is able to read, it might be an audio provision of the content of the letter or their decisions. There's a lot more that we can do, but again, unless these organisations know from you the difficulties that you're facing, they might not change, and it's very sad that you've gone on, I don't know how many letters you've had, or not had, as the case may be, from the hospital, and nobody has been able to bring it effectively to a conclusion of actually they must telephone you to give you that information.
Thank you, Jamali.
No letters to that stage. You can have it in Braille, all the other format, or a different language, and when we phone them up about it, they say they can't do it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, someone needs to take them to task on that, it's totally unacceptable.
If they put a note on the computer that I do need phoning up to tell me when my appointments are, so they've got no excuse not to do it.
Thank you, Tina. Rupert.
Yes, well, firstly, Tina, it's good to meet you again. I knocked on your door on Sunday. We had a good chat, as you may recall. And you asked me a question in which I wasn't able to answer, and now I can answer it. The Green Party Manifesto is available in Braille and is available in audio. We can talk more about how you can access that afterwards if you want, but I'm glad to be able to relay that news to you. So, very, very important question. And I think the answers are quite clear here. I think we've already heard much of them. The DWP, it's outrageous that it's not being inclusive, and similarly for other organisations such as in the NHS. Julian's quite right about inclusive design. I want to suggest to you that perhaps one reason why some of these organisations are not working as well and as inclusively and as humanely as they should do is that they are increasingly subject to managerialist pressures and in some cases to pressures to produce a profit. I was interested to hear in the opening remarks that our chair read out about Daniel's views, that Daniel, quote, wants to make sure that private companies aren't in charge of NHS services, unquote. But unfortunately that isn't actually true. There is only one party standing at this election that wants to eliminate the private sector from the NHS, and that's the Greens. And my belief, our belief, is very strongly that when you have companies that are making a profit, then it's just not at all clear that it's going to be in their interest to do the best thing, the most humane thing, the most inclusive thing for all of their clients. And we think it's just not acceptable for people to profit out of other people's ill health. So for that reason, we want to keep all of these services thoroughly public. And where the private sector has incurred into them, as it has under the last Labour government and under this government, we want to remove it.
Thank you, Julian. Thank you.
Rupert.
Sorry, I apologise. Another question from the floor. Can I take, yes, the person at the back? Yeah.
You, I think.
Hello, I'm visually impaired, and what the question about ATOS is that it's a form, it's a tick box form, and to be quite honest, the people who are sitting there and ticking the boxes, and you go there, what medical, if you've been diagnosed that you're registered blind, you know, and the doctor has told you that, and the surgeon has told you you can't work for any reason whatsoever, and it's just a tick box question, what is the point of it?
Thank you. Can we just have your name, please, sir?
Scadden, Michael.
Hi, Michael. Thank you. Okay. Right. Julian, you're first this time.
Yeah, I think you raise a really important issue here. And one of the things that I've been arguing in a number of cases, I mean, I've dealt with about 32,000 pieces of casework, and this is probably about the second or third largest collection of things. And one of the things that I've argued is that when a doctor has made a serious diagnosis, that should be enough. Because there are a whole range of conditions which are very, very serious, lifetime conditions, and there is simply no point having a look to see if it will suddenly change. My mother's vision went when she was about 13. It deteriorated very sharply until she was about 17, and then slowly got worse and worse and worse. There is no way it is ever going to get any better. There is little point somebody trying to find out if her eyes have suddenly started magically working again. She'd be delighted if they did. But it's just not going to happen. So we should have a system where, if it is clear-cut like that, where there's a clear diagnosis of something, there's a number of conditions where that would apply, you just skip the whole assessment process, because it's missing the point. But the problem is that far too often, far too often, it misses the point, because it doesn't understand what's actually going on in someone's life. Far too often it gets things factually wrong, which means you have to go through the whole process. And I really do think, I mean, the people who do the assessments, I'm sure they set out with the best intentions. My experience has been one of frustration. In one recent case, we had to get to the stage of me sort of pulling all parliamentary rank to allow my assistant to be allowed to take any notes of what was happening, which was really sad. I referred earlier to this ludicrous position where a company set up to assess people with disabilities didn't have wheelchair accessible rooms, because who would think that somebody with a disability might occasionally show up in a wheelchair? I mean, what are the odds?
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Michael, for the question. I alluded earlier in the week, last week, to the opportunities to train people who are interacting with people with mental health difficulties, and I think that's key. At a local level, implementation of the benefit system has definitely gone haywire, and this is where we need to encourage and train up people. It's about education, awareness and funding. Those are the key things for making sure the system works as it should. Clearly, Atos, there are difficulties. It's not fit for purpose. Tick box exercises do not treat you as a human being, and that is only by treating people as human beings that we actually get the best results for them and for society. So that's something I will be keen to champion.
Thank you very much. Okay, excellent. Rupert.
Well, you might be able to get my answer to this question from the answer to the previous question. Private companies, their primary responsibility is to their shareholders. Right? That's what they're for. That's what they're instruments to achieve, a profit. So whether it's Atos or Maximus, in the final analysis, you can bet your bottom dollar they're not going to have the best interests of the people they're supposedly serving at heart. We ought to be returning to having a public sector ethos in this country. That's what we've lost far too much of. And we in the Greens would want to bring that back and say, not Atos, not Maximus. Get rid of those and return to it being a proper public service again. Finally, I don't think there are any children in the room, am I right? I'm just going to be a little bit rude and a little bit flippant and say that real problem with Atos, of course, is that they just didn't give Atos.
Yes.
So just a second, and Shamali didn't quite use all her time. She's got another point that she very quickly wants to make.
I was talking earlier with gentlemen about how the Papworth Trust could also work with local organisations. Particularly, we're talking about the station and having access to the station, and people with disabilities who have to ring up 24 hours in advance to Cambridge Railway Station to say, I'm coming to take the train to London. And this is an area where Papworth Trust could offer the training to the staff at the train station, so that they can deal with someone if they turn up and say, right, I want to go to London today. So there is room for other organisations that might not necessarily be under the fixed umbrella of the National Health Service to come in and provide that training.
Thank you. Daniel.
Two very specific answers to your question. I think one of the things which so frustrates so many people is they just don't understand why decisions have been made. And quite clearly, they don't understand them because quite often they're wrong, as the 40% shows. So one of the things that Labour is promising is there'll be much more transparency in the system. Everyone will get an individual account of exactly why the decision has been made. And I think that's a big, big change and something that will be very welcome. And the second point is, how did we get to this system in the first place? I think it's because disabled people didn't have a voice in designing the system in the first place. So again, Labour is pledging today that all these policies will only ever be discussed in future with people actually at the table at the heart of government. And I hope people like the Papworth Trust will be part of that discussion. Because I think if you were, I don't think we would have ended up with a system like this. And I don't think we should have to wait 5 years and see all the misery that's been inflicted for people to come round again and say, well, we would do it differently. I think you could have predicted a lot of these problems. And I think if you'd been there, I think you'd have made sure it didn't happen.
Thank you. Madam, I know you've been trying to come in for a few moments now.
I can't ask all the questions I wanted to ask. I just wanted to respond to you about saying that about providing training for people around disabilities. Who do you think would pay for that? Because the private companies are not going to splash out on external training, or would it be mandated that they had to, in order to be operating, they had to have that training? And secondly, I want to say, sorry, I'm Beth from the Cambridgeshire Alliance for Independent Living. Part of my job, we're commissioned by Cambridgeshire County Council to facilitate their service user engagement for adult social care in the form of their 4 partnership boards, for which we are really struggling to get the members of the Alliance Committee to come to, although we're making some progress. But so we talked a bit about making things accessible. That's half of my probably working days are spent contacting people who are asking, coming to us, can you ask your members about this consultation, about what we should do for this strategy and that. And I spend a lot of my time going back to them and saying, well, yes, but can we have it in accessible formats? Can we have it in British Sign Language? Can we have it in audio? And by the time that you've got, well, you don't often get many of those, but by the time you do, the time has been eaten into for the consultation periods because they're not long enough to start with, which is probably due to pressures from central government. Targets are set and these things have to be rolled out yesterday. So just wondering what commitments would you make to really, if you're going to do consultation and service user engagement properly, you have to allow enough time to do it and in the right formats.
Thank you very much. I'm going to ask the candidates to keep their answers very short, to try to keep it to a minute because there's a lot of people still want to come in with questions. So let's get the consultation period in order to further engage disabled people. Shamali, you're first.
Very quickly on the point of funding, I did say that the key problem that we have at the moment is in terms of a lack of education, a lack of awareness and a lack of funding. So those are my 3 priorities. Oh, sorry, I'm sorry. I don't know if I can lift the microphone up.
You all looked at them, but none of them actually went, we're not going to stick down.
Thank
it's
you.
hard for people to see the lips. So.
You say it to me.
Okay, that's good, that's good. Shamali, would you like to start answering the question again? I'm just going with that.
Very quickly on the point of funding, the key issue is that it's a lack of education, a lack of awareness and a lack of funding. And that's something I mentioned earlier. So what I would be looking is to campaign for more funding, more awareness and more education. And it's only through that greater funding that you can be able to provide the training that is so required. And the other part of the question, sorry,
was that consultation period in order to further engage disabled people and methods of consultation, I think.
It's a great point. I think consultation periods in a variety of areas are far too short. And I've had to deal with this from a planning law perspective as well as a variety of other areas. And it's so important if we are going to move towards a society that embraces everybody, that is a society for all. And I'll just qualify the definition of equality of opportunity because it was wrong. Equality of opportunity would be like a race, but where everyone has a staggered start, depending on the allowances that need to be made. So the person on the inside lane doesn't have an advantage on the person on the outside lane. That's equality of opportunity.
Thank you, Shamali. If I can just remind candidates, please, to keep the answers short. Rupert, please.
But why do we need to have a race at all? I mean, why does all of life have to be a competition? You know, can't we cooperate a little bit more? I think that both parts of the question are extremely well taken. In the name of keeping things brief, I'll just say something more about the first part, about funding. So Shamali says her priority is more funding. Well, she should tell that to David Cameron then. I mean, it really is extraordinary to hear this kind of thing from the Conservatives. I actually think that the big society was a really good idea, actually. I think it was a really good idea. The problem with it is it was simply used as an excuse to make savage cuts. Whereas to make the big society work, what you actually needed to do was ensure that organisations such as yours and many more were well enough supported. so that they could actually unleash the maximum from the population at large and get us all cooperating and doing these things together. So that's the way it should be. Not the big society as an excuse for savage cuts, but a real big society which requires the government to actually invest and to end austerity.
Thank you very much. Daniel.
Very good question. I mean, I think with the rail issue, what Labour's saying is that any future franchises, it'll actually be part of the franchise agreement, so it'll actually have to be in there. So the answer is the rail operators will have to pay, and I think that's really important. I think the Papworth Trust have pushed for a number of things, and I think we are responding positively on most of them. On consultations, this is a big question, and I think it's actually the case that far too often consultations aren't really proper consultations at all. There are predetermined kind of views, and they're often very short, and I think the people from LifeWorks would endorse that. So it actually needs to change the culture from the organisations, but the points you make are very well made, and I think that if you can show that it's not been a properly accessible consultation, it's quite legitimate to say we need to start that point with that point again.
Julian.
I mean, the rail issue itself is a really big one, and I actually... But, no, I know, but because I jointly chaired with a Labour and a Conservative MP a group looking at access to public transport. It used to be said in London, when this was first considered, people suggesting we should have disabled access for buses, and somebody famously said, well, there's not much point, you never see any of the disabled people on the bus. Yes, exactly. But to come to your real question, which I think was whether we should extend the consultations so that there's time to produce all these formats, I don't think that's the right way to look at it. All of those formats should be available from day one of the consultation so that you can start off. That's the way to fix it, and that's something which we would very, very much do. That's why our manifesto is immediately available in all these formats. And one thing in it, which I haven't spoken about yet, is to make British Sign Language an official language for this country. Because the people who do British Sign Language do a fantastic job, it is so important. If we don't support British Sign Language, we will be leaving a chunk of people behind. So let's have that as an official language. Let's make sure all of these formats are available. It can be done. To be done in education, Mayfield still do it.
Yeah. Thank you very much. There's budget there to do all these things in all accessible formats that they how is it going to be provided?
Thank you. I think that was a point well made. Thank you, Beth. This lady here has been wanting to come in for a while.
My name's Nikki Myers, and I wanted to ask if you needed the NHS, social care and the independent living fund just to survive, how would you feel given what's happening to those services, and who would you vote for?
Absolutely fascinating question. Thank you very much, Nikki. And Rupert's going to be cursing that he's first.
Well, yeah, I think it's a superb question and very movingly put. Thank you. Well, as I've already implied, the Green Party is the party that is standing at this election in England and saying that what we want to have is not just an NHS that is, quote, free at the point of delivery, but an actual public NHS that funds enough and that is fully public. We kick the private sector out, no more making money off people's ill health. Furthermore, we are in favour of full funding of social care for the elderly, for those who want it. End of. Again, you might say, well, that all sounds rather expensive. The social care would be paid for by some of the things I've already mentioned, some of the tax increases we're prepared to make that the others aren't, and some of the cuts that we're prepared to make, Trident, HS2, etc., which the others aren't. Final really important point though, if you get the NHS right, it doesn't actually need to carry on getting expensive more year after year. Why is it getting more and more expensive year after year? Two of the key reasons are, one, that it's being privatised, and that makes it more expensive, not less. And two, that we are not, as a nation, getting healthier, right? When we have rocketing cancer rates and heart disease rates and mental illness rates, we're not getting healthier. Why are those things rocketing? Because of inequality, because of stress, because of poor levels of cycling and walking, because of poor diet. These are all the things that Green Party policies are designed to address. In a holistic way, you address all those things, and then you actually create a more healthy society. That's what we need to be doing, not just supporting the NHS.
Thank you, Rupert. Daniel.
Well, I don't think you'll be surprised to hear that I'd encourage you to vote Labour in that position. But the reason I'd encourage you to do this, I think, is to look at the evidence of the past and see which party it is. You've got the T-shirt on, you love the NHS. Well, that's why I'm a Labour politician, because to me, the NHS is absolutely my party's values encapsulated in practice. that moving Danny Boyle ceremony at the Olympic opening, it brought the country together, didn't it? What was it about? It was about the NHS. Now, I think Labour's record under the last government, there were things that I didn't didn't entirely agree with, but overall, it was a massive, massive improvement. Largely due, I have to say, to the hard work of staff. But it's a really, really tough thing to do to keep the NHS working at the kind of level you want. And I think it's really sad that what we're seeing at Addenbrooke's at the moment is a lot of that slipping back. 23,000 people waiting more than 4 hours in A&E. A 1 in 5 chance, if any of us has to go there this afternoon, we'll wait more than 4 hours. It wasn't like that 5 years ago. So I think you can always predict the future by looking at the past. But the big thing is, there's an argument between the parties about who will spend most on the NHS. I'm glad that's what the argument's about. But I just don't think the Conservative plans are credible. George Osborne was asked 18 times. And it's not, I don't blame Jamali for this, I think it's George Osborne who should answer the question. But you can't just say we're going to put money in and not say where it's going to come from. We just don't believe it. And when you look ahead at the cuts they will need to make, some of the leaked documents show they will fall on the benefit system. They'll fall on carers allowance. You know, I just think look at the evidence. So, in the end, I think you know which party is going to be the party of the NHS.
Thank you, Daniel. Rupert tells me he's got a very quick
Well, just very
5-second
quickly,
comment.
Daniel, you tell us to predict the future by way of the past. Which party was it that privatised Hinchingbrook? Which party was it that brought in the private finance initiative? It was Labour, right? So they're living off their past reputation. Labour are no longer the party of the NHS. Don't be fooled by the spin and the talk.
You allow me to respond to that?
You've got 5 seconds.
5 seconds. Yeah, but look at the outcomes, Rupert. It was much, much better then. This is not just an argument about ideology. For patients, what matters is what kind of care you get. And that's the
happy
test.
with the privatised NHS. I think that's clear. Okay,
thank you.
good.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, I would encourage you to vote Conservative, and the reasons are this. David Cameron has kept at his heart and his core the NHS. And why? Because he had a son who was born with cerebral palsy and another underlying condition, which meant that he had to sleep on hospital floors, be there and be at the mercy of very dedicated healthcare professionals. Myself, my mother was a midwife in the National Health Service for 20 years, and I know that if not for my mother's training within the NHS, I wouldn't have made it here today because I was born at home unexpectedly early and Mum had to do everything herself. Through growing up in an environment where the NHS is considered the envy of the world, I have grown up with the belief that our dedicated healthcare professionals are actually the people that we owe the most debt of gratitude to. We are committed to an NHS that is free at the point of delivery. On this issue of privatisation, I want to clarify a few things very quickly. 5% of the NHS was privatised under Labour. 1% has been privatised under this current coalition government. Ask yourselves, have any of you had any interaction with Macmillan nurses? Now they provide some excellent care at a very needed time. That is contracted out from the NHS to Macmillan. So there are areas where it can work, there are areas where it has failed. And what we need to do going forward, it's about more funding. Under this government, 12.9 billion has gone into the NHS, the highest any government has ever put into the National Health Service. I'll be very brief on these final 3 statistics. 9,500 more doctors, 7,000 more nurses in the NHS, 2,200 more midwives. There's a long way to go, but you do need the funding to be able to do it. And that is about balancing the books and having a fair taxation system.
And I'm very conscious there are still lots of other people who want to come in. Could you in 5 seconds?
The entirety of the NHS in 5 seconds. I mean, the NHS is one of our greatest institutions. It was a liberal idea, Lord Beveridge. It was implemented by the Labour government. You know, we're both very, very proud of that. And I've been very proud of the NHS. I haven't agreed with everything this government's done on it, but I also haven't agreed with everything the last government did on it. Rupert was right to point out the privatisation of the PFI, things like Hinchingbrook. And now we're in a position where the Chief Executive of NHS England has said that by 2020 you have to have £8 billion extra as a bare minimum for the NHS to keep going. Now my view is that our job as politicians isn't to squabble about it, but to find that money for our NHS. Now, Labour has said they won't do it. Andy Burnham was very, very clear this morning.
Very clear on the radio this morning, Daniel.
And I don't
Anything you can conjure up, we can conjure up.
So Andy Burnham's been very clear that they'll put in £2.5 billion rather than the full £8 billion that's needed. And he's defended why he doesn't think the £8 billion is needed time and time again. The Tories, as we've heard already, 18 times George Osborne had no idea how to come up with it. We've come up with a package which involves some tax rises on wealthier people, closing loopholes, because we have to have that money. And politicians shouldn't fiddle with it, other than to make sure mental health gets in there, which is one of the few exceptions I've made. We also have to link health with social care much, much better. We haven't talked at all about carers. We have to support carers who do an amazing job. We should provide some support for them, make sure the NHS recognises carers. We have a package about carers as well. And I've worked to make sure we have intermediate wards and a range of other things I'm being looked at. The last two things I would say, nobody has yet mentioned the independent living fund. And our manifesto has an absolute commitment to say that we would want to see a proper replacement for the ILF because it is so desperately needed, to why we've written it in there. So in terms of how to vote, I've done well, you might not think it's an unbiased assessment, but from my perspective, I'd say vote for me and the Lib Dems. But, you may think that's biased.
Thank you, Julian, and apologies for that.
That's good.
Shmali, you wanted to very quickly come back on a very precise point. You really do have 5 seconds, and I'm going to stop you.
In terms of funding, how are we going to achieve it? We've pledged 2.2 billion already from the autumn statement by reducing the deficit, and the further 8 billion that's required is through increasing taxes, through the number of jobs people are taking on, and also 760,000 new businesses started up under this government. So it's more through taxation.
Thank you very much. There's a gentleman at the back who's been looking to come in for a long time. A gentleman
Thank you.
in the striped shirt.
So, can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Good. I'm James from Voiceability Speak Out Council, which for those of you who don't know is the consultative forum for people with learning disabilities and autism across Cambridgeshire. We've got an issue that we brought from our drop-ins, which include in Cambridge City, on behalf of the 3 Speak Out leaders who are with me today but have asked me to ask the question on their behalf. But I think Russell is going to help me. Russell, do you want to tell everybody what your position is? What's your job? So Russell is our representative in Cambridgeshire for people with high support needs. And can you remember what we were going to ask a question about?
What need your help? The hate crime.
Did everybody hear that?
Was that hate crime? Sorry,
Yes.
James.
So the question is, disability hate crime is known to be highly underreported. Why do you think this is, and what can we do about it?
Why?
Thank you both very much. Thank you, Russell. And thank you, James. Daniel, you're first. Would you like to get a question? Hate crime, and why, and what would you do about it?
Absolutely, I can be very brief on this because I've already mentioned it, that Labour will specifically legislate the strengthening laws on disability hate crime. So it's a clear pledge in the manifesto today, we will do it.
Thank you very much. Julian.
Firstly, it's good to see you all here, and it's been an honour to have the chance to go and speak to you, to hear from you at a whole range of Speak Out Voiceability meetings. So thank you, as ever, for raising and making sure that I and people like me know a little bit, at least, of what we're talking about. And disability hate crime is disgusting. There is no doubt about it. Why does it happen?
Why?
I think it's because some people in society don't quite see people with some disabilities as being the same as them. I mean, it's wrong. I'm not endorsing that in any way. But I think at heart, that's why it is that people see it as an acceptable thing to do. It's not acceptable. We have to make sure it's not acceptable. And our manifesto is very, very clear. And we will make sure the police record it and take it much more seriously.
Thank you very much. Shmali.
Again, this comes down to a local level of policing as well as what we can do from central government. So at a local level, what I would be looking to do is work with police forces so that we highlight the gap in terms of unreported crimes that are hate crimes against those who are disabled. And at a more fundamental level, at the level of government, one of the things we're trying to do is to make sure that people have the confidence in reporting a crime. I have found through my work that sometimes people think, oh well, the police aren't going to do anything about it, so why should I bother? Or they report a crime and the person who is persecuting them in the first instance takes umbrage to the fact that they've reported a crime against them, and it gets worse and worse. So we need to protect people in society properly, particularly those who are vulnerable, and I believe that that would be the way forward.
Thank you.
Well, I think fellow panelists have more or less covered the answer to this question. I'll only add that I think as well as legislation, there's a cultural shift that still needs to be had here. I think we're still facing a society which has some taboos in this area, where there is still some prejudice in this area. I think the prejudice in this area has not diminished as much as it has in relation to some other areas, such as, for example, in relation to sexism and even homophobia. So I think that there's an ongoing work of outreach, of public education, of cultural shift. I don't think we can leave this all up to education. We need to make, to legislation. I think that we need to make sure that in our day-to-day lives and in the way that we present role models and all sorts of things like this, we keep trying to push the boundaries to make disability of various kinds, learning disabilities, developmental disabilities, etc., no longer seem to be something that can't be talked about or that is in some way, something which can be made fun of or looked down of. I think we can do it.
Thank you. I'm going to take a final question from the floor, and then I'm going to allow the candidates an opportunity to...
Can I just ask a related question?
Please.
Related to disability hate crime, how much...
So would you like to introduce yourself?
My name's MJ Black, and related to disability hate crime, I would like to ask how much do the panel think that language and our use of language has a detrimental effect towards disabled people? And if you were to become our MP, and I came to you and said, I don't like your language, I think that's unacceptable, what would you do about it?
I think that's a really, really interesting question. Thank you very much, MJ. Julian, first.
Well, I agree. Language can be used in incredibly bad ways. I hope I've corrected myself every time you've told me off. And I hope I don't make too many errors. Obviously, if you came to me, I mean, you know, we have spoken on quite a number of occasions, and I'm sure, firstly, that you would tell me if I made a mistake. No doubt about that whatsoever. And I am also sure that I would do my very best to make sure I don't make the same mistake again. It is a huge, huge problem, because the way we do talk about people does say something about how we think about people.
Thank you very much. Molly.
Thank you very much for that question. I think the issue of language is one that is so important, and it's important from a variety of perspectives. We've seen in the last week how words can be distorted, how people can infer words that other people have never even said, and that is very unfortunate. So yes, I take on board the idea that you should go to your representative and be able to talk to them about the language that they use. That's fundamental to having a truly representative democracy, and it's a very important point. Thank you very much for raising it.
Thank you very much. Rupert.
Yeah, well, again, I'm comfortable with what the previous two panelists have just said. This is something important. I think I'd just like to add that this begins, I think, relatively early in life. I would like us to be thinking about and looking at how we can find ways of encouraging and helping children not to form, if you will, bad habits in this regard, which I think then persist and develop later in life. I think that's a time when this is challenging for people, but I think it's the most important time because that's when some of this stuff gets set in. So let's work across not just the community of adults and politicians, but across the whole of our community, starting with children, to try to ensure that ways that we have of talking about each other are not hurtful. And that seems to be a reasonable demand that everyone could try and work with.
Thank you, Rupert.
Sorry, can I just butt in there? So, if you were my MP and I came to you and said, you used a specific word that I don't think is appropriate, how would you react?
Yeah, well, I can give you a real-life example. A couple of months ago, I think, 3 months ago, I called some climate change deniers on Twitter morons, and I was then picked up on that by people suggesting that the term moron could be offensive, which, in all honesty, I hadn't realised.
And your reaction to that was?
Well, there was a back and forth, and after a while, I apologised and said, yeah.
Because I just wanted people to pick you up on.
All right, okay, well, good to meet you. I don't know, sorry if you missed my...
Can I take this as an actually be using that word because I find it offensive.
Well, I'm sorry if you missed my apology on Twitter. I did an apology on Twitter and tried to make a point of making sure that people saw it, but I'm sorry if you missed it.
Thank you.
I think language has been really important for many, many years, hasn't it? And progressive forces have used language to reclaim territory quite often. It's been a powerful thing. And of course it changes over time because that's part of the struggle. So my answer to your question is, I would ask you how you want things defined. And I'd say that to every group. And that will be controversial sometimes, and sometimes groups will not necessarily agree with one another. And that's the nature of politics, it's the nature of debate. But I'm very conscious of that, and I think it's quite interesting as you look over the years at the changing terminologies. But these are battles, and politics is about that democratic debate. So my answer to your question is, I think I'll come and ask you quite early on for the right things to be saying, because I think you're quite powerful.
Brilliant. Okay, we are, and very, very quickly we're about to close down the questions. Go on.
What I would like to know is, you're all sitting there going on about getting money for this, money for that, money for everything else, especially the NHS and mental health funding and social care. Why are you letting all these big companies like Starbucks and all these other companies who owe our taxman fortune? You'll come after the common person here who goes out and works, and if we don't pay our taxes, they send us a bill and they want it straight off.
Okay,
they want it straight off. But you let all these big people pay 10% of the billions they owe our taxman that would put all this to rest.
Okay.
So I want an
Thank
answer,
you.
please.
Thank you. Okay, a very, very quick 30 seconds answer from each candidate, please. Okay, so the point was about corporate taxes, Jamali. The tax law statutes need massive simplification. There's 6 volumes. Yeah, 6 volumes. The simplification, there are 6 volumes of tax legislation in this country, and that, the sheer volume, the sheer number of tax provisions that there are, mean that big businesses who can hire people like tax consultants and tax advisors are able to find the loophole and navigate their way throughout that loophole. I would campaign for a more harmonised taxation system within the European states. I think it's doable. And also I would campaign for simplification of the tax legislation so that people can't hide behind loopholes. When did we start hearing about Starbucks and all these other companies that have been going on?
Small businesses very badly as well. If the large businesses are able to get away with this kind of nonsense. So thank you, absolutely.
Daniel, please keep them short.
Yeah, when the reason the Conservatives have failed to do what they claimed they were going to do is actually because they're too close to a lot of these big companies, and the hedge funds fund their party. So they're never going to be able to do it. I think it's really interesting that 10 days ago, Ed Miliband laid out 10 points on what we would do this time. And I'll completely fess up on this. I don't think Labour was nearly tough enough last time. But as you may have noticed, Labour and business have drifted apart a bit over the last few years. And I think we're in a position now where we can actually be really, really tough on this. So for instance, transparency on some of those overseas dependencies is really, really important. What we're saying to them now is, we're going to make you publish. Now those kind of things are going to make a difference. So in answer to your question, yes, we do want to find the money. We do think those big companies should be paying, and we're going to make it happen.
Yeah, but making them publish and making them pay are 2 different things.
Oh, it's a key starting point.
Not
Julian.
Look, it's a great question. I'm amused because only a few days ago Ed Miliband, who Daniel says is now a reformed character, was pitching for Tory votes, saying he's actually in the middle and he can work with all the Tories. You know, I don't quite know which one it is. But you're right, people have not collected that money. It's been true for decades. There have been loopholes for ages. We've closed some of them under this government. There's a new Google tax to try to deal with some of the companies that dodge like that. There's a bank levy which has collected billions and billions of pounds, and it's now broken 10 billion. There's stamp duty loopholes closed so people are paying more. There's a lot more, but there's a lot more that we still have to do. I've been working on a tax dodging bill with Oxfam, Christian Aid and many others. And I hope that we can get that passed. It's ready to go. And one of my priorities for the next government will be to do that, to close those loopholes so that we do collect that money. We had a system under Labour who cut capital gains tax, where a banker who could pay a nice accountant paid a lower tax rate than their cleaner. That's not true anymore, but we still have far too much like that.
Thank you. I'm just really conscious of the gentleman at the back who's had his hand up the whole time. Can we have a really quick question from you, please?
How did get the table money for me? Just people money for me. Just people money. I'm very How does disabled people make money, disabled money?
I don't think we quite caught that. So.
Disabled money. Yeah.
How can disabled people make money?
How can disabled people make money? Okay.
Yeah, what he's saying is how can people who are unable to work and pushed into work?
So, no, I think actually, let's be really clear. I think what the gentleman asked was how can disabled people make money?
Yeah.
So let's stick with the question asked. And Rupert, you're first. Can we keep the answers very, very quickly?
Yeah, so I'll just say one thing, which is that, of course, many disabled people find ways of working in all sorts of ways, including in companies that are specifically set up to help disabled people work. Some of those companies require public subsidies or other kinds of assistance. Those have been cut over the past few years. It's another example where we in the Green Party think this is plain wrong. Austerity has to stop, and disabled people need to be helped when they're able to and when they want to work in that way. So thank you for the question.
Okay, thank you very much. With the first question, so Daniel, would you like to answer this?
Yeah, I would agree with much of what Rupert has just said. Basically, it's changing the attitude of employers in particular and being much more imaginative in how we help support people. And of course, that's a lot of the work that Papworth Trust do. So I don't think we should have this attitude that people with disabilities somehow can't work, can't make money. But if you want to, we need to be there to help you and support you.
Thank you very much. Aidan?
The key thing is what different people want to do. Many people with disabilities want to work, can work, do work. There are people with disabilities in Parliament, not enough. We have a deaf parliamentary candidate I've been working with, for example. Many people with disabilities can do lots of things. Some people with disabilities, it wouldn't be appropriate. Fine. So we should be helping people who want to work, and not forcing people to work who can't work. It's about doing the right thing for the person. That's, by the way, why I'm on the equality of opportunity, not the equality of outcome, because different people want different things to be able to do. So let's make it right for the person.
Thank you very much.
I really like the question. I think it sets a real nice tone going forward. How can disabled people make money? I think all too often we sometimes look at the poverty of ambition in society. People shouldn't, if you're not good at maths at school, well, that's okay, don't worry, you're great at football. I don't subscribe to that. I genuinely want every child to have the benefit of a solid education that gives them the opportunity to access the global jobs market, whether you're brown, black, white, disabled, whatever difficulty you are facing in life, I want to give you that opportunity. We have heard today, when I came in earlier at the Papworth Trust, I was told about a lady who had not worked for 10 years of her life, and she wanted to work. And it was through the Papworth Trust that she was given the skills to be able to access a job, and now she's gone on to become a life coach. I think every one of us has a talent in society, and I have found that through working with the children with special needs here in Cambridge, that if we can find what that talent is, your life can be so fulfilling, and it is rewarding for the people that help you get there.
Thank you very much. Okay, we're now going to go on to the final wrap-ups. I'm really sorry because I know there's people that have wanted to ask questions, haven't been able to, but time isn't on our side, I'm afraid. So I'm going to give each of the candidates a couple of minutes to wrap up and summarise what they would do for disabled people, their carers and organisations that support disabled people if they were re-elected. Daniel, would you like to go first?
Certainly, and thank you very much for all the questions. It's been a really good discussion this afternoon. Look, in 14, 15 days is a huge choice in this country. And I would just say to people here, people particularly in third sector organisations, can you imagine what 5 more years will be like, given what we've had over the last 5 years? And it will be 5 years. And it's absolutely critical that people concentrate on this. We've all talked about the good things we'd like to do, and I can tell you more about Labour's manifesto. But it will come down to seats like Cambridge. There's only a handful of seats in this country which will determine the outcome. And the truth is, it's either going to be David Cameron or Ed Miliband. And with David Cameron comes a whole range of characters, including Ian Duncan Smith. And that's what you'll be waking up to in 5 days, in 15 days, if Labour doesn't win in Cambridge. So it's really, really important that people concentrate on that. But let me finish on the optimistic note, which is that actually I think Labour's plans to help and work with the disability movement are really quite encouraging. I think the transparency around the system, the fact that you will have a voice at the table at the very top. Most of all, actually, the bedroom tax will go instantly. These are things that are worth voting for. So don't get distracted by the promises that others are making, because actually in most cases they can't be delivered. Most of the things the Liberal Democrats and Greens talk about can only be delivered with a Labour government. And you only get a Labour government if Labour wins in Cambridge.
Thank you very much, Julia.
I won't comment on that. It's been a really interesting discussion. We've touched on a whole lot of really interesting, really important issues. And over the last 5 years, I've spent my time as the Member of Parliament listening to many of you here in the room, learning from many of you about what we ought to do. And I hope I've been able to show you some of that experience today, understanding some of the issues that there are. If there was one message which to me would resolve so many of these things, it's making disability issues far less of a fight. Because currently it is constantly a fight, whether it's a fight to get help for children, fight to get the care that you need, fight to get support for carers, fight to get the health support you need. It's constantly a fight. That is the thing that above everything else we have to try to change. I've talked about some of the policies, we have many more, but ultimately that's what it's about. So whether the issues are visible or invisible, whether they're physical or mental, what I can commit to is that I will continue to listen to you, I'll continue to work with you, and I'll continue to stand up for you. And if that means trying to force a Labour government to do things that are better, I'm quite happy to do that as well.
Thank you very much, Shemali.
Thank you. It's been very informative to meet with several of you today and hear the issues that you have faced during your lifetimes. I think actually the real test for a politician is to be able to lift the debate about disability and about health above political lines. It shouldn't be a political football, and that's the key thing. In Cambridge, we are the city of the brightest minds, with pioneers in science, technology, innovation and research. We have the opportunity in this city to really lead the way in the world. And this is part of my ambition to make Cambridge the global benchmark for a fairer, greener, more sustainable society. It's possible because of who we are, because of Cambridge's recognition on a global platform. We can lead the way in how we should treat people with disabilities. You can only do that if you have a strong advocate for Cambridge. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Well, what I've been seeking to set out this afternoon in what has been undoubtedly a fascinating and wonderful discussion, thank you for it, is some of the ways in which the Green Party has a unique offer at this election. We're the only party promising to end austerity, to end the cruel discipline of cuts that there have been in the last few years, to end the cuts to good things so that we can pay for good things and not for bad things. The other parties are not willing to challenge the super rich. They're not willing to sacrifice sacred cows such as the Trident nuclear weapon system or HS2. Well, we are. So Jamali's right, disability, the NHS, these shouldn't be political footballs, but they are. That's the sad reality, they are. And what we have to do is make sure that we end up in the right place on them. Otherwise, as Daniel says, the next few years are going to be grim. There are so many more things we could have spoken about this afternoon. The Greens want to return railways to public ownership. We're the only party that does. We want serious action on dangerous climate change. We want to make the living wage, we want to make the minimum wage into a living wage. But we're out of time. I'll finish by saying this. A long time ago, Cambridge used to be a Conservative seat. Then went Labour. It now has a sitting Lib Dem MP. I used to be in the Lib Dems. I'm thankful I'm not anymore. Daniel tells you you've got to vote Labour, you've got to have a Labour majority government. But we have four-party politics now in this city, and in this country, 4 or 5 party politics. If you believe in what I've said this afternoon, then please vote for it, because you know what? You're not going to get it any other way.
Thank you. I'd just like to finalise by saying thank you to all of our candidates, and I'd just ask you to give them a round of applause. I think very rich debate. We've covered everything from social care to benefits to taxation, employment, and pretty much everything in between. Apologies that there wasn't sufficient time so that everybody could ask all the questions that
There
they
was
wanted.
sufficient time. This wasn't due to finish until 6:30. And I have a question, and you just ignored it.
Yeah. So just announce that, gentlemen, we were due to finish at 6. There is an opportunity for people to have coffee and have tea and for people to hang around. So if there are questions that you want to ask any of the candidates, if they're available, then I'm sure they'll stop for a cup of tea or coffee. I think what's really important is that regardless of how you vote, that you do exercise your vote on the 16th. Thank you very much.